Hi, everybody. I look after the CPE activity for ARRIS outside of the United States. I'm based here in the UK. And I have to say to start, between Fraser, who called our set-top boxes pianos, and Alejandro, who wanted to get rid of them, and Google, that may or may not develop a set-top box, it's an auspicious start to the presentation. But I will do a bit of a whirlwind view of what's happening in the connected home. We have the benefit of working with operators around the world. You've heard some of the more progressive operators over the last few minutes, but not every operator is on the same path and journey. So I'm going to give a bit of a perspective around video and broadband and the ways that an operator can potentially differentiate and add value to the services that they provide today. So clearly there is an enormous amount of activity if you look across the different spectrums of video, broadband, wireless, and then what we call other. I've highlighted some of the ones that I'll discuss in a little bit more detail during the presentation. But clearly 4K or UHD, again, depending on the market, has taken off quite well. I mean, it's not announced, but we just landed our first operator in Pan-Africa doing a 4K set-top box. It's quite appealing to understand when an emerging market like Africa is selecting a 4K set-top box for the next generation platform. So you're starting to feel that inflection of technology at that point. Clearly, we're leaders in the DOCSIS and broadband space. So DOCSIS 3.1, the next big evolution in speeds to the home in the cable industry. Obviously, on the telco side or the traditional wireline side, G.fast continues to make progress in many markets, and of course fiber to the home is more and more popular as that kind of insatiable appetite for speed continues. On the wireless side, I'll spend a few minutes on that. 802.11ax is the latest technology that is really enabling that, bringing that speed to the home and allowing that distribution within the home, which is really the battleground now. And then I'll touch on IoT and a little bit more on voice assistance as well. So clearly, as I said, the UHD market is growing, probably not to the degree that we would have thought a couple of years ago. Adoption in certain countries has been slower. Some operators are deploying 4K capable set-top boxes, but not necessarily enabling them with 4K content yet. Obviously, that's a dynamic that's at play. The gigabit devices or gigabit capable devices is also growing exponentially. I mentioned DOCSIS 3.1, G.fast, fiber to the home technologies. And then finally, if you look at the technology mix between AC and what is emerging on AX, again, will it look exactly like that in 2019? No, probably not. But two things of note there. AX will certainly start to adopt, and I'll show one slide on what we're seeing in terms of timing there. And then the emergence of tri-band as well in the home, we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So when you look at the features for connected devices across all of that spectrum between NTU devices in certain markets, kind of terminating that speed within the home, gateway devices that are evolving quite rapidly, and then the set-top box, yes, still around, that little thing called the set-top box, that's evolving quite a lot as well. So when you look at the multitude of features and functionality that you can enable, either include within that box or exclude within those boxes, it makes for a challenging roadmap of discussions. And much of what we do with operators around the world is consult on all of these different options, try to create things that are fit for purpose, in particular in my area in the international market, which is, of course, quite diverse. So the quantity of devices in the home, the device management, how do you manage all of these devices? Sometimes you're the ones that are providing that device in the home. Many times it's not you. Consumers expect you still to manage that. How do you do that across these devices? Security is a bigger and bigger issue. We're hearing spills in security every day, and that is a growing concern. How do we appease the consumer with their fears about, I'm adding all of these devices, what happens when there are issues? And then, of course, around Wi-Fi, it's not just about throughput, it's about reach. It's about, there's a growing belief that, the single gateway in the home is not going to provide that gigabit coverage across the entire home. Well, how do you easily add on extender devices, and how do you manage that? And there are many emerging standards in that space which should enable and facilitate that going forward. So in terms of value, I've kind of categorized it into four big buckets, which we'll briefly talk about each one. So From a consumer perspective, if the operator can provide simple, great, easy to use Wi-Fi that works across the home, that's nirvana for most consumers. We heard a few times, controlling that HDMI 1. Certainly, I think many operators now really believe that, right? Rather than try to recreate all of those OTT or create their own OTT environment, they're adopting that and creating an experience where consumers stay on that one HDMI input, stay on the operator's remote control. Operator has some control over the quality of that experience. And as a consumer, being in one spot and being able to seamlessly navigate is really what many consumers, including I'm sure all of you, really appreciate when you find that service that enables that functionality. The power of voice, certainly something that's emerging and I think is a great opportunity for operators to do more in that area. We heard some examples of that today. And then finally, IoT and what's really a land of opportunity, finding that balance of how to actually make money on that. And the complexity around that is still in question. So I'll briefly go through this. For those who have seen me before, I talk a lot about this, but when I say LAN equals WAN, there is an expectation from consumers that the speed coming to the home has to be the speed they see in the home. And that is a big, big challenge for all of us in the community. And, and a lot of times, where that speed is coming into the home is on the opposite side of the house. So back to that single gateway that is supposed to cover with gigabit speeds the entire home. Not really possible anymore. So we are seeing an emergence of extension devices and more Wi-Fi devices. And as an operator, you need to think about, if people are going out and buying third-party devices to manage that in-home Wi-Fi experience, many times if that doesn't work, who are they calling? They're not calling the Plumes and the Eeros and the Googles and others. They're calling you, the operator, because they associate that in-home experience with you, the operator. So very important to solve for that. So the devices now are, and we'll talk a little bit about the standards there, are supporting things, and I won't get too technical, promise, but about AP steering and Wi-Fi meshing, and a lot of these, plug-and-play technologies that we're now seeing now help consumers in that regard, and I think is a great opportunity for operators to really capitalize on that. And then for those of you that are doing video over Wi-Fi, that adds another layer of complexity. Many operators are doing video over Wi-Fi, but when you look at, the complexity of what it was before, you have DVB or ATSC, QAM coming into the box or IP coming into the box and then HDMI out. Well now, in a complex home, you could have packets going in, one going into an extender and out, and where is the failure then in a 4K sporting event when there are issues there? So you best have an in-home management capability that you can see what's going on in that house so that you can guarantee that level of service in video over Wi-Fi. So careful consideration is clearly needed in that space. So from a consumer perspective again, putting our consumer hats on, we want to make this as simple as possible. Simple as the wires were there before. Consumers love Wi-Fi, we all really enjoy it. When it doesn't work though, it's a big issue. Not quite electricity or water, but nearly to that degree. So I'm not going to do too many advertisements for ARRIS. We think we have some of this figured out. A lot of this has been learnings over the past 2-3 years. A lot of it has been working with the standards bodies to ensure that we're not trying to create something that's proprietary, that only works with ARRIS devices, because that's not going to solve for it. Because even if we have an ARRIS set-top box talking to an ARRIS gateway, and we have luckily that in many operators' homes, there are a lot of third-party devices that are coming in. We can't control everything, but we need to have a solution that allows the operator to take control, to manage that Wi-Fi in a seamless way, because you have an opportunity to charge for that. And there are some operators that are offering super Wi-Fi services out there and charging an extra amount per month. Verizon just launched something yesterday in the news around that, between $10 and $30 extra a month, depending on, and they would manage not just your Wi-Fi, but even the security aspects. And that's just one example of many that are out there. So I think there is a way for operators to increase their ARPU in this space. So I talked a little bit about standards development. There was a special interest group, and I won't name names, but some of the operators in the room were part of that. It was a collection of some manufacturers like ARRIS, silicon providers, operators that came together and said, hey, we really need to figure this out. You know, when you buy one piece of silicon, it has slightly different Wi-Fi features. They're all part of the standard, but they're not, you know, the way that it's implemented is slightly different. And that just doesn't work in this environment. We need something where you can buy a retail product talking to an operator or another gateway and be able to seamlessly manage and extract all of these new features that are needed to allow for gigabit in the home. And that's what this group came together. And ARRIS was part of that, but there were several other companies that contributed. All of that knowledge was contributed back. And one of the protocols that was developed was called MAP, or multi-AP protocol. And this is really one of the foundations of allowing this seamless communication between devices, seamless onboarding of new devices in the home, as well as being able to steer the traffic to the right AP. You know, if you start thinking about, there's not just one gateway in the house anymore, we're going to have multiple access points. As you're walking around the home or the conditions change in the home, you know, fast steering, make sure that the clients are talking to the best possible, excuse me, best possible access point in that home is really a necessary component to allow for this multi-gigabit speeds that we'll eventually get to. So I could go into a lot more detail here, but you know, there are standards that are now becoming available. You'll see them emerge later this year. ARRIS is moving completely to a supporting MAP on our future gateways and extenders, and we encourage the entire community to do that as well. So very briefly on 802.11ax, kind of our view of the timing here in terms of what features are available, in what kind of format. First, probably in retail, of course, and those devices should be coming out later this year. You know, 802.11ax makes your eyes water in terms of expense right now. So for an operator to jump to AX, it is a big jump, but that will change. Lower cost silicon is starting to emerge now as well, and you know, the first tablets and smartphones probably in, you know, around the CES timeframe 2019, and that will really kick off you know, more adoption of this technology. So at a high level, what does it bring you? Well, it brings you, you know, more capacity in the network, more tools for Wi-Fi management in the home, more speed ultimately, but it's not just about speed. I mean, it uses technologies that we're used to in 4G as an example to really manage that data within the home in a much more effective way. So we do see AX taking off over the next 18 to 24 months. There are a couple of operators that are very bold and are jumping in, wanting to be first because it'll be a marketing pitch as well. I've got the fastest available Wi-Fi in the world, 802.11ax. Of course, you know, between having a gateway that supports it and client devices that support it and extenders that support it, that whole ecosystem needs to come together. That will clearly take some time. So the future broadband home, I wish we could actually describe what this will really look like. But you know, we are seeing an emergence of tri-band, as I mentioned earlier. So that ability to backhaul that traffic back to the entry point into the home. So you'll have two radios that will transmit out. Obviously, one will probably be AC to start, and perhaps one will be AX, and then you'll have an AC or AX radio that brings that traffic back to the gateway and out into the cloud. So lots of debates about how many antennas you need, 4x4, 8x8. Again, that's a whole topic of conversation. I would say mostly in the international market, 4x4 is something that is probably seen as sufficient, but lots of discussions right now around tri-band. And it's not inexpensive, but solving that in-home piece in an effective way and being able to potentially charge more for that is something that operators are starting to look at. So lots of RFP activity in this particular area. So, going to switch from broadband to video really quick. Despite some of what was said, you know, video is alive and well. I think in other sessions over the last morning has been said, you know, the dynamic, and I deal with this even with my own company. I mean, ARRIS is an American company, lots of noise about what's happening in terms of cord cutting and video subscriptions, video revenue going down in the US. From an international perspective, you know, of course we are seeing some of that dynamic, but not to the same degree. So video is alive and well. It's a growing space for ARRIS. It's a growing space for the operators that we support in many markets around the world. However, there are things that are changing in that space. And this has been said a few times, but just to kind of put a fine point on it, and Ed will be pleased that I put the Android logo on there, but clearly, we're the volume leaders in set-top boxes, work a lot with RDK and TiVo and SBL, our own Korea TV, Android now more and more, because there is still a lot of diversity out there, clearly in this space. But most operators, I would say, really have bought into, the warning sign is if a consumer is looking for content and they have to go off of your service to find it, off of your remote, off of your box, off that HDMI 1 input, that is a concern. You don't want that ideally to happen. That said, and luckily with RDK and Android and other solutions, the ability to integrate the likes of Netflix and YouTube has been a pain point, continues to be. I mean, let's not kid each other. I appreciate everything that was said earlier, but it is still a challenge. Netflix has very strict requirements. It helps when there are standards way to implement that in terms of silicon providers that work with them and application layers and SDKs. All of that helps, but it is still a challenge for operators to integrate Netflix, right? We've done a lot of consulting around that, but clearly this is an area that will bring a lot of value to you as an operator if you can keep all of them in your environment and allow consumers to get the content that they're going to find anyway, one way or the other. So controlling that HDMI 1, so if we wanted to kind of summarize video in a short presentation around what we see are the keys to continuing to have a great video experience, certainly that Wi-Fi HDR set-top box, enabling that experience in the home is highly important. A Wi-Fi set-top box gets away from the issue that Alejandro said in terms of a lot of cables and gives you the flexibility to have that box in multiple places around the home, which consumers really appreciate. We talked about the user experience. That UI, that user experience is absolutely key. We all know it. We've been in hotels or at home or working on different services where you look at a UI and UX and you say, wow, this is really intuitive. So easy to find what I'm looking for. That's what's needed, I think, to continue to succeed. And voice support, as was said a few times, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is something that's really emerging. Lots of activity in that particular area. Multi-screen support, obviously, being able to have that experience, not just on the TV set, but in other devices as well, whether you're on or off net, is key. And integrating all those OTT sources, as I said earlier. So in terms of voice, I mean, clearly a lot of, I don't know how many of you have a voice assistant of whatever kind at home. I just got one. I mean, you think it's kind of a gadget at first, and then you say, well, what? And then I kind of looked at what are people using it for, and I have to say I'm in that category. Playing music, just being able to say, Google or Alexa, play this song is really interesting. Checking the weather, fun questions, that gets boring after a while, but that's interesting, and then general research, et cetera. But how do we take some of that control aspect and bring it to the operator environment and enable that to make the service more sticky, make it easier for consumers to find what they're looking for? So then we look at, just one use case, right? The number one call to the call center, and I guess many operators hopefully would agree with this, is people forget their Wi-Fi password, right? So one use case could be ARRIS or Google or Alexa, what's my Wi-Fi password? Obviously, there needs to be a tight integration with the operator service at this stage. Some operators are going their own way, integrating their own voice solutions. Others are integrating their own solution plus a third-party solution as well. But you can think of multiple use cases where that ability, that ease of having voice is really something that's quite powerful. And again, not without its complexity in terms of integrating that into the CSR capabilities, doing that end-to-end integration to make sure that it's a seamless environment, but clearly an area where we're doing more and more work with operators around the world. And then finally, I'll just briefly talk about IoT. IoT is interesting, and I'm sure there might be questions afterwards as well. We've been talking about it for a while. Our CTO in the group has been, proclaiming that this is the best thing that could happen to operators for many years. However, there's a lot of inertia and some opportunity there. Is it something that is more retail focused? Do you want to have a professional install? Can consumers do it by themselves? Should the service provider subsidize these devices? Should they have their own devices? How much can you charge for an IoT type service, et cetera? So that is probably part of the challenge why there hasn't been necessarily a killer app that's created IoT and really pushed it to the forefront. However, there are some interesting areas there that we can see that consumers are interested in the IoT space. What really comes to light is more around security, home automation, clearly. Energy management is another big use case, utility management. Aging, we have older parents, keeping an eye on them, having that comfort, et cetera. That was another use case that's come up in some of the research that we've done. And finding a way to not just do as an operator voice, data, video, but adding this IoT capability. Again, in most markets, consumers trust the operator to be that single source. So, yes. Okay, I will quickly go to the last slides then. So again, the complexity around IoT is, as you can see here, integrating into what device? Is it the set-top box? Is it the gateway? Is it a separate IoT hub? So clearly, and what standards, what radio standards are needed there. So last two slides, tying all that together, having that IoT experience, having that great Wi-Fi experience, adding that smart assistant capability in some device in the home, could be the set-top box, could be the gateway. Having your own trigger words, it's not just about obviously partnering with third parties, having your own trigger words, so you're tying that into an operator service is quite important as well. So at the end of the day, last slide, thanks for allowing me to go over a little bit, is it's about keeping that consumer happy. The trusted choice of the operator space, managing and improving that Wi-Fi coverage in the home. The multi-AP home is absolutely here right now. Lots of standards happening in that space to facilitate that. Don't lose control of that remote control. Voice is really an opportunity, I believe, for operators going forward. And that gigabit home, that promise of the gigabit home seems quite complex. Last plug for ARRIS, we can help, and we'd be delighted to, and think TCO, not so much in total cost of ownership, but it's a tremendous consumer opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you.